If your business is like most, digital transformation is your goal. But to achieve that transformation, many infrastructure elements must work together, particularly data, application development, storage, and the cloud. Hi, I'm Stan Gibson, and I'll be your host and moderator for this on-demand webcast. Joining me to explore how to implement the infrastructure you need to achieve digital transformation are two experts. Tim Cook, Principal Architect with Insight. Welcome, Tim. It's great to have you here for this webcast.
Thanks, Stan. Really appreciate it. Happy to speak with you today and all the people listening.
Also joining us, Jody Hoagland, Global Technology Evangelist at Dell. Welcome, Jody. I'm glad you could be with us today.
Hey, Stan. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this modernization that's going on in the industry.
Tim, you're up first, so I'll hand things over to you now. Tim.
Thanks, Stan. I think as we talk about modern IT operations, it's really important that we kind of focus on how we got to where we are today. And so, when we look at most businesses, we've got that tale of two buyers. So we look at the traditional IT operations led by your CIO, maybe a VP of IT. And what that IT group is really focused on is systems management. They probably have years and years of ITSM processes in place to ensure stability within their infrastructure, and then working with the business on setting requirements around security, DR, and compliance. And last but not least, really making sure that they've got a plan in place for infrastructure lifecycle, ensuring that platforms are always up to date and providing what the business needs. And on the other side, we've got the DevOps group, so typically led by a CXO. This is where your data scientists are going to live, your developers are going to live. And they're really focused on product lifecycle management from an application perspective, whether that's an internal app or an external facing app. They're constantly staying up to date on software development methodologies and new frameworks to increase their time to value. And they'll be doing both maintaining existing applications as well as application modernization. And what we found is there's kind of this gap in the middle that we're really focused on trying to solve. So from an IT perspective, they really need to get to a place where they've got API first delivery, automating those deployments so that it's repeatable and consistent, maybe building out hybrid clouds and adopting public cloud infrastructure, and ensuring that the things that they've traditionally done around security and DR are less of a point thing and more of a continuous operation. And from a DevOps perspective, they really want is that rapid infrastructure deployment. So they can't wait for days or weeks or months like they traditionally did. And that's something that the public cloud has kind of driven. And to go with that, they want the ability to continuously monitor what's going on in that underlying infrastructure. They don't necessarily want to have to use the legacy interfaces that traditional IT is used to look at what's going on with that underlying infrastructure. They want to be able to pull that into their code. So, what does this all mean? And really what it means is that traditional IT, while they have a very important place within the business, I think the business is asking them to shift left and move closer to those developers and provide a more timely experience for those developers so that we can drive time to value. And really what the fundamental layer that we're all focused on, and you've seen it on The Economist, is that data is the new oil, right? That is where companies are finding the ability to generate more revenue. So that development, what it's really focused on is how can we monetize that data? And, a lot of times it may also be if we've got private data, we need to ensure that we're securing it or protecting that from outside actors. And as a part of that, we need to be able to bring our compute to our data. So what we've talked about in the past is that there's this idea of data gravity. And what that really means is wherever that data is being generated, we need to be able to bring our applications to, because moving data around is really, really hard. Moving compute around tends to be a lot easier, whether that's in the public cloud, on-prem, or in some sort of a hybrid fashion. And most importantly, I think what we can't forget is that we need to design these new systems to accommodate both the legacy stuff that you've got on-prem today, because we've got to keep the lights on. Even in the largest organizations, even in the most modern organizations, if you look, they've got legacy applications that they have to maintain. Famous one was Amazon had their big announcement that they were finally completely off of Oracle. And we think of Amazon as kind of a market leader, and they're one of the furthest along. And even they were still on some of those legacy applications. So ensuring that whatever we're building out is both capable of supporting what we've traditionally got, and then also being nimble enough for that new DevOps infrastructure. So as a part of this discussion, something that we hear a lot is cloud native. And I think there's a lot of confusion about what that means. Traditionally, a lot of people talked about software defined, and while that is true, I think if we really dig in, what we're talking about is everything is code. When we're talking about cloud native infrastructure, what that's driven is the ability to consume infrastructure through an API. And what traditional IT is realizing is that, that software defined idea of, well, I can just run it on any hardware I want. That's just not enough. That's partway there. That is an important goal to seek. But a lot of times we are going to have specialized hardware for specific applications. What it really means is the developers want to be able to consume that through an API. They don't want to have to go back and wait for somebody to manually stand up new infrastructure. They want to be able to click a button to run a script to ensure that that's being deployed in a timely fashion. And most important, what that really brings is we've now got version control systems. So I expect that I can check my infrastructure into a version control system. And what that allows you to do is much like what we've seen in the development world is I can track history. When I push an update, it's easy to roll back because it's just a rollback in a version control system. And in order to do that, again, we really need to be API first.
Well, Tim, let me jump in and ask you a question. I'm wondering, does this
Sure.
mean that administrators are going to lose their access to graphical interfaces?
That's a question we get a lot, and understandably so, right? You've got guys with a long history with a lot of products that have a familiarity with those GUI infrastructures or the GUI interfaces. And no, it doesn't mean that's going away. What it really means, though, is that there's an expectation from our infrastructure providers that they're API first. And what we mean by that is anything I can click inside of a graphical interface should be accessed through an API. So traditionally, when infrastructure vendors were building out their products, there wasn't necessarily a way for a developer and an end user, in the public to actually be able to recreate that activity that, you point and click with the mouse. And what we're expecting now is that anything that happens within that graphical interface is making a publicly available API call on the back end so that I can automate it, so that I can have that checked into my version control system. At the end of the day, there are always going to be certain activities that are easier to do through that graphical interface or, easier to consume. But having the ability to still tie that back into that version control system is really important. But great question. We get that a lot. So kind of going on to this graphic, which I think a lot of people are familiar with. This is what we view as DevOps, that CI/CD workflow where we're continuously deploying our code and continuously updating it. And this is really, the idea behind DevOps is being nimble and, again, just driving that faster time to value for the business versus some of the older methodologies where our deployments were measured in years sometimes, or maybe even longer. This is really focusing on getting those deployments out more rapidly, making smaller changes, and being able to deploy fixes if we do run into a problem quicker, as well as being able to automate all of that so that at the end of the day, us humans tend to be the cause of most failures within an environment. So as much of this that we can automate, we try to really ensure that we can drive more stability as well as agility. One of the things, though, that we found as we're having these conversations that kind of gets lost in that discussion, as you see in this next slide, is that in order for that DevOps to really work, we need to have a solid infrastructure. And this is where that modern IT operations comes in. And this is where traditional IT shops really have learned that they have to start building that infrastructure so that it is consumable in a similar fashion to what we've seen from the private clouds, so that we can be more nimble, so that we can, public clouds, so that we can actually deliver infrastructure in a timely fashion and being as nimble as what those developers have come to expect from the public cloud. So what does this look like in actual practice? This graphic is really kind of giving an example. This obviously is not a complete slide from every possible option that you've got today, but kind of starting at the top, we've got those public clouds. So, where we've seen a lot of customers that we've worked with doing those public cloud migrations, a lot of that is prioritizing the migration of legacy infrastructure. So figuring out what fits best in the public cloud versus maybe staying on premises, that's really the hard question. The easy one there is when we're writing those next gen apps that we've developed specifically for external consumers and we need that cloud agility. We're helping customers there as well write those new applications or properly size them, but really figuring out what should and shouldn't be on-prem has been a major driver to modern ops discussion. And then kind of coming to the next layer down, this tends to be what you've got on premises, ensuring that the infrastructure that you're choosing on premises is cloud ready, is hybrid cloud ready, does fit into that modern IT operations bucket that we were just talking about. And then moving down, these are some of the players that will definitely play in that hybrid cloud space. So ensuring that you can move your data seamlessly from on-premises into the public cloud. Again, going back to that data gravity, ensuring that our data is being placed in the most appropriate spot.
Tim, now this is somewhat of a confusing slide. What are the complexities that you would expect administrators to understand and pull from this?
Yeah, so, this one is a little bit of an eye chart, and, this is a very valuable slide depending on, who we're talking to. I could spend an hour talking to just this slide, but in the context of modern operations in our discussion today, I think The key here, what we're really trying to show is that there are a ton of options out there in the market today. I would say in most of the Fortune 500 customers we work with, they've got maybe a dozen of these in their environment today. And really the key for traditional infrastructure administrators or managers or even VPs, really what this is saying is there are a ton of options. So when you are looking at infrastructure, you want to ensure that it's flexible because it needs to be able to interact with pretty much anything on this page. And you don't want to silo yourself, right? So a part of this, a part of being nimble for the developers is ensuring that if they choose a product kind of upstream of your infrastructure, that your infrastructure is ready to interact with that, you aren't having to do a forklift upgrade of hardware just because somebody chose a new software platform. That's really the takeaway on this one. And then last but not least, kind of on that same discussion point, from a developer's perspective, they have a ton of options. And this is a continuation of that chain. And again, this is another one of those slides that I could talk to for an hour by itself, but ensuring that you aren't tying yourself to something that you aren't going to easily be able to change out in the future, because one of the good and bad things about this new DevOps landscape is that there are new players coming in constantly that are providing new functionality that really can't be done with some of your legacy frameworks. And being nimble enough that you can adopt those quickly without having to reconfigure everything in the entire environment. That's really key when you're making these decisions. So where does Insight fit in? And obviously our good friends at Dell will be talking shortly as well, but we're really focused on helping IT deliver that modern operations. We've built out these infrastructures, the nimble infrastructures we're talking about, both in the public cloud, in the private cloud, in that hybrid mode. And we're really trying to help our customers be that enabler so that IT is lifting up the developers and helping them achieve what they're looking for versus being an obstacle. Well, at the same time, being able to maintain the security and the requirements that the business has driven traditionally, because a lot of times that falls off the cart when legacy, and I say that in air quotes, IT isn't involved in some of these discussions. So helping with strategies, design, and implementation of these platforms, and then just laying the overall groundwork for this digital transformation, this modern IT transformation that customers are looking to accomplish. And with that, I think I will hand it over to Jody.
All right, thanks, Tim. Appreciate the insight, and it really bridges the gaps for transitioning us into what we're talking about with our net new technology from Dell Technologies with PowerStore specifically. So accommodating the storage landscape, but doing so and bridging those gaps, Tim, that you just, kind of laid out. I think in your opening slides, having that left side, right side with a spanning bridge in the middle, you're kind of getting the exact same landscape of what we're talking about here when we were going through the design and development phase of PowerStore as a primary storage infrastructure. And recognizing the growing landscape of data and all of the challenges that independent data growth presents, but then bridging this landscape into the DevOps world, the infrastructure as code world, the developers who are wanting more flexible demand to storage infrastructure or to infrastructure as a whole. And that puts a lot of pressure on the middle teams, these IT infrastructure teams that have to accommodate this back and forth and trying to figure out how do we make decisions on infrastructure? How do we bridge these gaps? How do we build these connections? And how do we allow our development staff and engineering staff access to these pieces of infrastructure in an effective way? So as you look at where things have been over previous generations, but yet where things are transitioning and moving to over this next data era, this is where you're seeing that divide grow more and more. And I think Tim and the folks at Insight can't be more in tune than what he just eloquently elaborated, was the fact that there is this chasm that has existed between infrastructure teams and trying to fill those gaps between the development teams and the engineering staffs. And that's exactly what we designed PowerStore to be able to accommodate, was to, okay, there's a traditional way of doing things, but there's this massive growing landscape of having to do things differently, smarter and more intelligent integration and automation and agility as far as programming. I know that the eye chart that Tim just showed and kind of walked through, there are so many different pieces that need to be able to plug in and to play. And so the primary emphasis from Dell Technologies with the development of PowerStore was to bring about this net new architecture, net new system that could accommodate and bridge those gaps and accommodate any type of scenario, whether it's the traditional standard way of doing things that folks have always known and are still currently using today, or whether it's this next generation concept of being able to create this autonomous infrastructure that can be dropped in and plug in to any of these development, automation, and orchestration landscapes. So PowerStore is a very intelligent array. It's an enterprise architecture that's designed from the ground up for 6 nines of availability, and it's very focused in 3 core arenas of being data-centric, intelligent, and adaptable. And as we kind of walk through, these are the core concepts that we discussed with that, data-centric aspect of a storage array. We want to be able to accommodate any type of workload, right? Not just any workload, but it needs to perform. It needs to be really fast, but it also needs to be highly efficient. And those are the 3 core aspects of this data-centric landscape. And that first aspect of any workload means that this is a unified architecture. We can run block workloads like Fiber Channel and iSCSI. We can run file workloads, NFS, SMB capabilities for file shares. But we can also support and accommodate next generation capabilities like containers. And we can do that today. Also accommodating next generation host side connectivity options like NVMe over Fabrics, both for Fiber Channel and Ethernet or IP-based connectivity. But we also built a system that's highly scalable. So it doesn't just accommodate the smallest of infrastructures or the largest of infrastructures, but it can do anything and everything in between. We have the ability to add capacity in very modular fashion, even doing things like single drive additions to the architecture, but also adding additional what we call appliances within the cluster. So you can have different flavors of PowerStore. Say in the example that you see here, a 5,000, a 3,000, a 1,000, a 9,000 series system, all living together in the same cluster, but also giving you the ability to have data moving between these appliances completely transparent or non-disruptive to the host. So some very effective enterprise capabilities at a very cost-effective mid-range price point, delivering these next generation capabilities. And we also mentioned it had to be efficient. And out of the gate, we're guaranteeing a 4-to-1 data reduction. This is really critical when you look at the growing landscape of data and how much data administrators and IT infrastructure teams are having to manage today, as well as the dollar per gigabyte and what it actually costs. So being able to reduce that data down in a highly efficient manner, but also simultaneously without compromising the performance of the system. We've worked really hard in the development of PowerStore in collaboration with technologies like Intel's Quick Assist technology or their QAT technology, which allows us to embed resources into the storage controller that allows us to do that offload of data reduction without any impact or performance overhead required for the system. So you can see this is, highly efficient and highly capable of handling any type of workload that you might want to throw at the system. But it also has to be smart. It has to be highly intelligent. I think, as Tim laid that framework, we're not talking about just living in a legacy generation of, hey, this is the way we used to do things. We have to move forward into this next generational concept of being able to plug into any of these landscapes of autonomous capabilities and programming, infrastructure as code, DevOps. There's all kind of buzzwords out there. And we wanted to make sure that PowerStore could accommodate any of those types of environments. So right out of the gate, we see that PowerStore is a highly programmable infrastructure. And I think one of the things that Tim stated as well that is critical here is talking about that graphical interface or user interface. And Stan, I think you prompt the question about, well, are users going to lose access to their GUIs or their graphical interfaces? And the answer to that question is no. However, Tim laid the point of being able to, the necessity to be able to bridge this gap to say, well, whatever I can do in the GUI, I need to be able to do via programming interfaces, API sets. And that's exactly what we've delivered with PowerStore. We have full feature parity between the graphical interface as well as the programmable aspect or the REST API sets. So whatever you can do in the GUI, you can do in REST. And whatever you do in REST, you can do in GUI. We have full integration with automation and orchestration tools from VMware, vRealize Automation. We've got full Kubernetes container-based deployment methodologies and container-based plugin capabilities. For people that want to do infrastructure as code and automate the standing up and provisioning of infrastructure, we can accommodate that via Ansible integration and that open set of REST APIs that I talked about. But you also have an environment in a lot of enterprise shops where they have a lot of talent, a lot of programming abilities, and you have IT staff that want to write shell scripts. And we have an open CLI where administrators can do shell scripting against PowerStore, or they can use things like Python and Python SDK or PowerShell. So however it is that you might want to interact with the array, you've got that capability in PowerStore.
Jody, I do believe this does tie into what Tim was speaking to earlier about infrastructure as code and DevOps. Tim, is that what you were trying to get across?
Absolutely. This is exactly what I was talking about before. What Dell has done here with PowerStore has moved to that API first methodology and created an array that allows traditional IT to bring the underlying infrastructure to those developers. This is exactly what we need to have that infrastructure as code. And this is the kind of thing that is required to tie into those version control systems and really make the infrastructure software defined.
So as we think about that level of intelligence of external programmability, we wanted PowerStore to be very smart on the inside as well. So it's not just highly intelligent from an external or programmability perspective, it's a very smart array on the inside. And some of the things that we want customers to understand there is we talked about this clustering concept where I can put multiple of these appliances together inside of the same cluster. But what if you had the ability to just dynamically expand that cluster on demand? This is really a plug and play methodology where you think of, a modern day laptop, for example. You take an external device like a hard drive and you take a USB cable and you plug it in. And the expectation is that your operating system is going to recognize that device. It's going to scan the bus, detect it. It's going to bring it online and make it usable just in a matter of seconds. And that's the level of integration and technology we've built into cluster expansion in an enterprise class storage array environment. You can literally drop this new appliance in, plug it into the rack, apply power, and hook it up to your network. And as soon as he's on the network, the cluster will detect that and say, hey, there's a new PowerStore appliance. Do you want me to add that to the cluster? And you say yes. He will auto-assign the IP addresses, auto-provision the storage controllers in the system, bring the storage resource pool online, and within a matter of minutes, that brand new appliance that you just took out of the box is up and running, ingested into the cluster, and ready to start delivering data and data services to the IT infrastructure team. But we didn't stop there, right? We kind of took this thing to the next level and we built in a lot of integrated machine learning. So we can actually understand what's going on with all of the data within a cluster. So for example, if we detect that, hey, you're filling up a volume on this particular storage array, and maybe you don't have any more physical capacity to expand that volume dynamically, we can detect that and then make an in real time recommendation to you. Hey, do you want me to move that volume non-disruptively to another appliance in the cluster that has plenty of capacity to make that work? You just say yes. He will then pick that up and move that workload dynamically for you. So it's not just about that external logic and external programmability. It's also about the automated machine learning and artificial intelligence that we built inside of the array that's constantly looking at data, understanding what's going on, and making real-time decisions that reduces the overall overhead that a storage administrator or that an IT administrator would have to spend in a traditional deployment methodology. So it's a really nice capability and a really nice feature. Now, to kind of bring this conversation home, we talk about that adaptability, the flexible deployment methodologies of PowerStore. I think in Tim's introduction, talking about this growing landscape of developer and DevOps and what's going on with IT and IT infrastructure and bridging these gaps, one of the concepts that we took a primary focus on with PowerStore was container-based methodologies. So if you rewind the clock, 5 or 6 years ago, this concept of container-based applications was really just starting to take shape and kind of bubble up to the surface on what were the capabilities of taking a monolithic application and stripping it down and running a subset of microservices that could do all of those different functions of this massively large application. Well, what if we could take that same concept and build it into a primary storage operating system? And that's exactly what we did. So the primary components that make up PowerStore OS or the operating environment is actually truly running containers under the covers. In fact, so much so, like take, for example, the NAS or the file services capabilities. That's actually running as an independent container. And the customer gets the option to deploy or not deploy that container. We have customers that they say, look, Jody, PowerStore is awesome, man. I really like this thing. This is cool, but I'm using, Dell Technologies PowerScale, for example, for my file infrastructure. So although you do unified and you do file, I don't necessarily need it. Well, okay, that's fine. You can just simply not deploy the NAS container. And now you've got a 100% block optimized environment or a block storage array with all of these cool bells, whistles, and features. So you can get very granular with how you manage this, but also it gives us a faster time to deployment and a faster time to deliver new capabilities and technologies as we move into the future without affecting the whole of the environment. Now, there's two core methodologies of PowerStore deployment, the first of which is what we call PowerStore T. And PowerStore T is just the traditional way of doing storage. I've got my storage array, I'm provisioning it up to my fabric or my network and then out to my host. And it's all of the cool goodness of PowerStore just in that traditional way of doing things. But then we have what we call PowerStore X. And this is something that the world has never seen before. This has actually never been done. And Dell Technologies is leading the charge here. And what we've done is in collaboration with VMware, we've actually created a storage appliance it's the exact same sheet metal as PowerStore T. It's the same system models. It's the same configuration options. Instead of installing PowerStore OS directly on the storage controllers, directly on bare metal, what we do in PowerStore X is we install VMware's hypervisor, ESXi, inside of this environment. And what that allows us to do is create this environment that we've marketed and branded as Apps On. And Apps On allows us to run the PowerStore OS in a completely virtualized VMware virtual machine that's HA'd and protected, while simultaneously being able to deploy application virtual machines inside of that environment. So when you talk about edge-based solutions or edge-based environments, this is a really attractive scenario for a lot of customers. We see customers in the retail space saying, we need highly scalable storage at our endpoint. And so this becomes a very attractive model because inside of PowerStore in a 2U form factor, you can accomplish nearly 1 petabyte of high performance capacity inside of 2 rack units, simultaneously running a subset of virtual machines in that infrastructure. So whether you're looking at these edge-based deployment models or making sure that you're integrating in with your core data center infrastructure and even extending that out to the cloud. And Tim talked about hybrid cloud. He mentioned concepts like data gravity and what does it mean to solve the data gravity problem. And that's one of the big focuses that we have with PowerStore and with Dell Technologies' primary storage infrastructure at large is delivering capabilities where we can extrapolate the data sets from the hyperscaler, but allow you to use all the data services and all of the compute and all the scalability that GCP has to offer, or that AWS has to offer, or that Azure has to offer, all while keeping that data extrapolated out, solving the data gravity problem, but giving you high performance, low latency, and extremely high scalability, cloud connected. So it's a very efficient model and a very cool way of doing things.
Jody, you spoke about infrastructure lifecycle. How do you keep things fresh?
Stan, that's a great question. And Tim elaborated to this, in the introduction of being able to maintain lifecycle management, not just with applications, but also with core IT infrastructure. And one of the concepts that we've came up with in regards to PowerStore specifically is what we call the Anytime Upgrade Program. And you saw early on the slides that showed the clustering capability. So we can drop net new appliances into a cluster. We can have seamless mobility of picking a workload or a volume up from one appliance and non-disruptively transitioning that or moving it to any other appliance in the architecture without the host ever knowing. But when it comes to the physical hardware itself, that form factor, or that 2-rack unit form factor that I discussed a couple of times, that's common, whether you're talking about PowerStore T or PowerStore X. And that common form factor and chassis also enables us to do things like anytime upgrade, where you can get free controller upgrades once they're available. I think that's a huge competitive advantage to customers in the industry, because they can take advantage of anytime upgrade. And as soon as that next generation of controller or that next model of controller becomes available to them, they can execute on that upgrade without cutting a check or having any additional cost. They also don't have to extend their maintenance agreement with Dell Technologies. So, we owe it to them. They can invest in that and take advantage of that opportunity of getting those controller updates as they become available and doing non-disruptive upgrades to those new environments in a seamless fashion. But not just stopping there, but moving into this next generation capability of saying, hey, as part of this anytime upgrade model, we cannot just give you the updated model of what you have. We can actually give you an option to go full-blown upgrade. So if you're in a 3000 series and you want to go to a full-blown 5000 series, imagine getting that full-blown upgrade capability without having to go back to the well, without having to get board approval or having to cut another check or go through the approval process or purchase order, right? It's just included, right? And so we give that to our customers. And then taking advantage, again, of the scale-out clustering capabilities. Since we owe you a controller update anyway, in the Anytime Upgrade Select program, you get to choose. Do I want to do this full-blown upgrade, say from a 3 to a 5 or a 5 to a 7 or a 7 to a 9? Or do I want to keep what I have and go ahead and get a second appliance and do the scale out, all the coolness of this clustering capability? Well, we can do that too, right? So since we owe you the controller subset, we give that to you. The only thing you have to purchase now is the capacity that you need for that brand new appliance. And so now you're in a scale out model. So delivering customers capabilities that allows them to keep the infrastructure fresh over time and accomplish lifecycle management of that infrastructure instead of going into these CapEx models, allowing operational models or OpEx models where they can keep the gear fresh over time. And that really kind of summarizes PowerStore in a nutshell and how we're bringing this generation of storage to market that is directly heads-on addressing these challenges of developer landscapes, cloud integration landscapes, data gravity challenges, automation and orchestration, automated data provisioning, machine learning, intelligence, right? All built in. These are what make PowerStore PowerStore. And we're going to market strong with Insight and their capabilities as a strategic partner of ours.
That's great information, Jody. Before we close, Tim and Jody, what are the key takeaways you'd like our audience to remember?
I think from Insight's perspective, it's really just realizing that modern IT operations is really about making traditional IT more nimble and helping to drive that business value. And it can be a very confusing landscape, and we've done this a lot, and we're more than happy to help customers map out their future and ensure that IT is meeting the needs of both their developers and the business as a whole.
Yeah, looking at it from a Dell Technologies lens, I think one of the big key indicators, Stan, is right in the middle of this slide. You see Dell Technologies Titanium Black Partner for Insight. There's not many of those players, and that just speaks volumes to the capabilities of Insight as a strategic partner of Dell Technologies, and us bringing these technologies to market, but having a very smart partner and integrator who can take those technologies and build them into solutions that customers are looking for. So it's a great partnership and it's a great relationship, and we're looking forward to, as you can see, a lot of continued revenue and growth.
Thanks once again, Jody. That is all the time we have in this on-demand webcast. Sincere thanks to Tim Cook, Principal Architect with Insight, and Jody Hoagland, Global Technology Evangelist at Dell. Thanks to both for explaining how to build the right infrastructure for digital transformation and how the Insight-Dell partnership can enable transformation with data-centric, intelligent, and adaptable storage solutions. For more information on this topic, including the slide deck for this discussion, please see the resources area of your webcast player. And thanks for joining us. For Insight, Dell, and IDG, I'm Stan Gibson.